Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to tell you about Connie Zweig. I met Connie about 20 years ago when she was teaching at Pacifica. And when I started doing the Myth Salon, I reached out to her, and she has been an ardent supporter, just connecting us with all kinds of different psychologists and writers and therapists and what have you. She's a retired therapist herself. She's the co-author of Meeting the Shadow and Romancing the Shadow. During the time that I met her at Pacifica, she took off and wrote this book called A Moth to the Flame, The Life of the Sufi Poet Rumi. Well, her new book, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul, offers the right kind of inner work we need to break through the denial to awareness, move from self-rejection to self-acceptance, repair the past to be fully present, and allow our own mortality to be a teacher. So I'd like to have all of us welcome Connie this morning. And, you know, she's been gracious enough to get up so early as the rest of us. You wouldn't believe how hard it was first time I came to this. And it's a great way to anchor the week and get it going. And I can't say enough about the Mastery Circle. So Connie, welcome.
Dana, I'm so grateful for your friendship and our collaboration, and I'm grateful for you introducing me to Mary Grace so that I can see all these lovely faces on my screen this morning. So thank you all for having me. I'm very grateful for that. I'm also grateful to Tim, who did that research to introduce Jung's quotes on the shadow. That was a sweet surprise. And, you know, Dana, your clip on the Tao, is this Jonathan on the screen whose voice that is? Oh, Jonathan, I'm so glad to meet you.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So that clip was very moving and very relevant. It was a perfect setup because what I want to explore with you this morning in the shift from role to soul is the shift to become an elder and a spiritual elder for this community. And what I heard in that citation from the Tao was the contrast between accumulating stuff, accumulating knowledge, accumulating information, and emptying and letting go and clearing out. It was from a spiritual perspective, but we can look at that contrast from any level so that when we're, you know, in our midlife empire building stage of life, it may be appropriate in this society to be accumulating knowledge or to be accumulating training or things or money to establish stability. But as we go beyond midlife and begin to cultivate elderhood, the Tao is such a beautiful guide for that because it presents the opposite values and the opposite qualities and just where we need to begin to turn our attention now. So I'm using a little bit different language in the presentation, but I was so touched by that clip. And when I'm done surfing this tidal wave on the book, I'm going to go back and watch the videos on the Tao because that was really moving to me. So I'm going to move into the screen share for the PowerPoint, and hopefully this will go easily. So as Dana said, I'm the author of Meeting the Shadow and Romancing the Shadow, and also Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality. And I'm sometimes known as the shadow expert. So you might be asking yourself, what does that have to do with aging and becoming an elder? It turns out that our unconscious fears and images about age actually shape how we age. Let me say that again. Our unconscious beliefs, feelings, and attitudes about old age that are in the shadow help to determine how we experience it. I learned that when I read decades of research from Yale University psychologist Becca Levy. And that discovery made me realize that I had one more book to write, How We Meet the Shadows of Age. And I was astonished because that means if we can detect what's hidden in the shadow about this transition, we can do something about it. We can engage the inner work of age. We can begin now with self-reflection during the next half hour that we have together, 45 minutes. And so when I ask you questions, you can make notes and take the time to contemplate them later. And we'll see if we have time for discussion at the end. So here's another startling fact. The director of MIT Age Lab noted that there are roughly 8,000 days between birth and college graduation. There are 8,000 days between college graduation and a midlife crisis. There are 8,000 days between a midlife crisis and retirement. And if we've planned well, there are another 8,000 days after retirement. For the very first time in history, this is a new stage of life. So you may have asked, what will I do with all that time? Or more deeply, who am I now? If you long for something more self-knowledge or gratitude, more meaning or contribution, then you can try the inner work of age. You can discover how to reorient by turning within, attuning to your soul's longing, and cultivating a deeper shift in awareness. You can discover how to move through this passage as a rite of passage, releasing past forms, facing the unknown, and emerging renewed as an elder, filled with vitality and purpose. The path onto this stage of life is filled with inner obstacles, which I call shadow characters. So it must be walked with intention. And I'm not referring here to doing more or doing differently. I don't use reinvention the way many experts do, from the outside in. My emphasis in the new book is on the internal, less familiar terrain of soul, those subtle yearnings that appear in images and fantasies, the ways we respond or fear to respond to those messengers, and the symbolic meanings we glean from them. As we learn the psychological and spiritual practices for late life, we deepen our self-knowledge and reimagine age for ourselves, eventually shifting from denial to awareness, from self-rejection to self-acceptance, from obligation to flow, from holding on to letting go, from distraction to presence. And most especially what I call shifting from role to soul. That term was coined by Ram Dass to refer to a shift in identity from what we do to our spiritual nature, whatever we name that. So, as renowned psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote, the afternoon of life is just as full of meaning as the morning, only its meaning and purpose are different. Whoever carries over into the afternoon the law of the morning must pay for it with damage to his or her soul. You know, today we're so privileged to have a wealth of practices from depth psychology and contemplative traditions. But how do we apply them to age consciously with renewed meaning and vitality? So let's begin together to heed Jung's warning. If we fail to hear the call to the inner work of age, and instead continue to obey the ego's demand for midlife heroic striving, then we fail to make the shift in identity from role to soul, and the soul will suffer. We can engage this work and find the treasures of late life, a newfound freedom from past roles and identities, an emerging sense of becoming who you were always meant to be, and a profound gratitude for the way that your life unfolded. As we make this internal shift, a natural generosity arises within us, and we seek to share our gifts of love and wisdom as a lasting legacy. This is the deeper dimension of age, the universal inner journey of human individuation or expanding awareness that includes the unfolding of our psychological and spiritual authenticity and authority. Even the unfolding of advanced stages of human development, which are described in every spiritual tradition as the purpose of late life. But if we're aging without a map, how do we find the treasures? When we cross a passage to become an adult, change careers, marry or divorce, have children or suffer a serious illness, we change archetypes. We step into a new life pattern. And for most people, this is not a conscious process because our society doesn't offer adult rites of passage. The shift from hero to elder or from role to soul may become more conscious when past roles and responsibilities fall away. Internally, the ego's lifelong identity as doer may be shattered, and a primary source of purpose is lost. So life after 50 may feel like we're in midair between trapezes, unable to let go of the past or see the future. You might ask, what will I do with this time now? But a deeper question may arise. Who am I? As I listened to many people during the research on my new book, I heard a pattern. They were undergoing another identity crisis, a return to the questions, who am I? What are my values? What do I believe? What matters most to me, and how can I give back to the common good? We typically ask these questions during a midlife crisis, but at that stage, the response tends to be a change in roles, a change in career or spouse or geographical location. But in late life, a change in role is not sufficient. So I now call this a late life identity crisis. And as I began to share the framework of the book, the idea that late life is a call to another rite of passage, and teach people the practices that are outlined there, they told me they discovered how to center themselves and find a new orientation in space and time. One woman reported that when she turned 70, she couldn't find an internal GPS. She had no navigator and no destination until she learned with the inner work of age how to orient towards soul. So you can discover how to reorient by learning shadow work and contemplative practice. You can discover how to move through the passage of late life as a 3-step rite, releasing past forms, facing the unknown, and emerging renewed. Each step has its own challenge. Letting go of the old trapeze, hanging in the air without a net, and grasping onto an unknown future. For me, this has been an ongoing practice. Letting go first of the therapist role, shadow expert, helping others on their journeys. I wrote a lot about my process of retirement from clinical work and what this meant to my identity as a doer, achiever, and giver. And then letting go of the writer, accepting that this is my last book, that this form of service is coming to an end. At a deeper level, I'm practicing letting go of my identity as smart, competent, master of the universe, as my husband calls it. I'm working on releasing control of outcomes, especially timing of outcomes. My life review, and someone mentioned this in the sharing, who was reviewing his life for a group process. My life review enabled me to see that it was never in my control. That was my ego's illusion all along. And it enabled me to feel immense gratitude for the way that my life unfolded. So since retirement and completing the book, I've stepped into a lot of uncertainty, which coincided with the liminal period of the pandemic. Millions of people are experiencing extreme anxiety-provoking liminality during this time, as someone else was just talking about with his family of 10. So I would suggest that a similar thing happens with the late life identity crisis. The structure of our day dissolves, the meanings shift, the capacity to serve takes different forms. If we're married, our roles may shift with different timings in retirement and physical illness and loss. If we do the inner work and cross the threshold from midlife hero to late life elder, we emerge into a new archetype. I only felt that I became an elder with a training, a one-year training that I took. But that training has continued for me with my shadow work and spiritual practices. So what keeps us from fulfilling the promise of this stage of life? Did you notice what you were saying to yourself as I read about the treasures? Or when I described the 3 steps of a rite of passage? What did you say to yourself when I said we need to step into the unknown? You may have noticed, maybe for others, not for me. What about all the bad stuff, the illness and decline? Who am I to wish for such a good life? I don't deserve it. Or I can't handle not knowing what to do. Or I have a traumatic past. I can't afford all this navel gazing. These voices stem from inner obstacles or shadow characters, which resist transition and reinforce the walls of denial out of fear of change or loss, keeping us stuck in archaic roles for years, which leads to an absence of aliveness and stagnation and even depression. So in the clutches of an internal shadow character, we fail to make the shift. Let me clarify what I mean by personal shadow, because some of you may not be familiar with it. It's a term that was coined by Carl Jung to refer to the personal unconscious. The shadow develops in each of us as children, as we identify with socially acceptable traits, like maybe politeness or generosity or caretaking, in order to find love and acceptance from adults. In this way, we form a conscious ego, and we banish the opposite traits, rudeness, stinginess, self-centeredness, into the unconscious shadow. So the ego and shadow develop in tandem, and each is reinforced by the messages, even the glances of parents, teachers, clergy, and friends when we try to gain their approval. If our sadness is shamed, it's exiled into the shadow. If our anger is punished, it's banished too. And we heard a lot about our anger today, erupting from the shadow. If our musical or artistic talent is dismissed, it gets buried in the shadow. But because it's beneath our threshold of awareness, we can't gaze at it directly. It's like a blind spot in our field of vision. And yet these unacceptable traits, which lie dormant, often erupt. And we heard about the challenges of that this morning in the group. We also see the shadows of politicians erupting daily these days. So I wrote this book to guide you past the denial of age to the inner work that allows you to investigate your resistance to this stage of life. When we examine life consciously in the context of impending death, we can respond to the messengers of age and undergo the 3 steps of letting go, entering the unknown, and emerging renewed. The practices of shadow work from depth psychology and meditation from your tradition can help lead you to this shift. In the context of age, most of us learn that being independent, quick, productive, and strong are highly valued and result in rewards of approval and status. So we learn in our society that independent, quick, productive, and strong are good. And we learn that their opposite traits, dependent, slow, unproductive, and weak, are devalued. And they result in disapproval and shame. So naturally, we dread the loss of these socially acceptable traits. As we age, slow down, do less, and need others more. If our images of and associations with life after 50 remain outside of our awareness in the dark room, then we're blind to them. Like my 89-year-old friend who told me that he didn't want to be with old people because he wasn't like them. We deny our reality and reject a part of ourselves. So take a moment now and contemplate this question. What about old is stuffed into your shadow? What stereotypes, fantasies, and images about aging are you carrying unknowingly into your late life? What creative and spiritual aspirations are hiding there, suspended in time, that you could reclaim now? If something comes up, make some notes. By learning to orient toward the unconscious more consciously, we deepen our self-knowledge to include that which has been excluded. A deferred dream, a secret desire, a hidden talent. So now, when the ego no longer reigns supreme, we can open ourselves and allow these banished feelings and fantasies to be heard. How do we typically meet the shadows of age? In dreams, when a part of us acts out in a dark or destructive way. In moods, such as feeling invisible, powerless, or irrelevant. In unacceptable parts of ourselves that erupt, such as the anger some of you were describing, or the feelings of neglect or abandonment, or a sarcastic remark like someone made about her husband. It might be about age. I can't believe she wore that at her age. These spontaneous remarks that bring us shame are the shadow erupting. Also in projections onto others. Who does he think he is at 80 years old? And when we feel humiliated and ashamed, I'm so embarrassed to be treated like I'm helpless. So we need to remain aware so that we're awake enough to notice when it erupts. And this process of slowly bringing the shadow into awareness, shedding light on the darkness, forgetting and then remembering again, is the nature of shadow work. And eventually we can learn to create a conscious relationship with it and reduce its power to unconsciously sabotage us. In the context of age, shadow work helps us reduce the magnetic pull of inner and outer ageism and break the spell of youth that keeps us in denial so that we can ripen into the full truth of who we are now. You may have noticed that you have attitudes or beliefs about age that you were unaware of before. Perhaps you observed how you felt as you expressed them, uncomfortable, embarrassed, anxious. When we begin to make the unconscious shadow more conscious, we uncover surprises about ourselves, and we have more choice to act differently and have different outcomes. Here are the most common inner obstacles that I've found, and this is kind of the framework for the book. The book is built around these inner obstacles and then the practices to get us through each one of them. If we identify with youth and deny age, we're unaware of our ageism against ourselves and unknowingly collude with institutional ageism. This is called internalized ageism. I call it the shadow figure, the inner ageist. If we identify with self-image, success, or other midlife values, we miss the opportunities to connect with shadow and soul. If we identify with doing and deny our need to slow down to self-reflect, we keep doing what we've always done, rather than experiencing aging as a spiritual practice. If we identify with a narrow band of time, without a 360-degree view of our past, present, and future journeys, we remain stuck in denial of the past and fear of the future. If we identify with regret about the past, or feel like a victim of our history, we miss the opportunity to let go of the past, give and receive forgiveness, and live and die in peace. If we identify with past religious or spiritual beliefs and don't re-examine them so that they're congruent with who we are now, we won't repair our relationship to spirit or to our place in the universe. If we identify with a narrow, separate sense of self, we lose the opportunity to cultivate our connection to something larger than ourselves and move into higher stages of awareness. If we identify with feelings of isolation and powerlessness, we deny the call to serve the common good. So if our evolution is blocked by any of these obstacles listed here, we can't cross the threshold to become an elder and complete the rite of passage. Let's pause for a moment and just ask yourself, what's the most important one for you? For some of us, the call to age consciously or become an elder is a messenger that awakens in us a yearning for something more. a longing to go beyond a role, an identity, or a purpose, and to connect with something larger. It may stir a desire to turn from doing to being, to slow down and contemplate the lessons learned from the life we've lived and the life we have not lived. But some of us deny and resist the call. And the purpose of my work is to investigate that resistance. Disoriented, we can't imagine a life without the structure and purpose of work. Disconnected, we feel empty as we try to imagine what will fill our days. Disliking our new appearance or denying our limitations, we feel nostalgia for the past or fear of the future, and we're blocked by those inner obstacles. They stop us from step one, letting go. An inner obstacle arises, our identification with doing. And consciously, our work is determined by our success and appearance. What would it mean for a CEO to stop being a CEO? Or a teacher, therapist, salesperson, doctor, writer? What would it mean to put down a role, slow the pace, and look within? What stops him or her from stopping? And other inner obstacles stop us from taking step two. Are we terrified of stepping into the unknown? Or step three, are we stuck in uncertainty, afraid to emerge into something new? So let's shed light on some of the common shadow characters that are triggered at this transition, that hold us in lifelong patterns that no longer serve us. The part of us in denial, which I call the inner ageist, tells us that if we're no longer young, triumphant providers, we're not fit to do anything else. Or if we're no longer attractive, persuasive earners, we're not fit to do anything else. And so we just keep doing the same thing, the only thing we know how to do. For each of us, these choices are personal, and we all have different needs and values and circumstances. So you won't find me advocating for a particular plan, except for this. Late life is a time to turn inward, to make a transition from a heroic focus on doing to an old elder's focus on being. But it's not necessary to stop doing in order to start being. The evolution from role to soul is not about what we do, but how we do it, the state of mind in which we do it. So here's the key. We need to cultivate a state of mind that we could call the elder's state of mind. It results from doing a life review and seeing our story in a wider frame. It results from emotional repair, giving and receiving forgiveness, to release the past and live fully here now. It results from mortality awareness, the end of denial about our limited time horizon. And it results from spiritual repair, a re-examination of our beliefs and images of the divine. But most of all, it results from letting go of the ego's agenda. It's striving to uphold a self-image and feel in control of outcomes. This is the consequence of connecting with something larger than the ego, a universal or transpersonal center, the aim of contemplative practice. How we imagine late life may be more important than what we do. Negative beliefs and images hidden in the shadow influence health as we age. And Yale psychologist Becca Levy, who I mentioned earlier, demonstrated that our exposure through the lifespan to ageist stereotypes are internalized in the brain, mind, and body. And this leads to the inner ageist, when we're turning the target of projection against ourselves, resulting in self-hate and shame. These unconscious fears and beliefs affect our physical health, mental health, memory, and will to live. All of the perennial spiritual traditions teach us that late life is a time for practice. So how can we apply that to our lifestyles today? Let's explore retirement for a few minutes because it's an obvious example of our roles falling away. But you can find other doorways to soul in the book as well. With retirement, most people make a shift in identity away from work and toward encore careers, service, hobbies, creativity, or leisure. Some of these roles include opportunities to explore new parts of ourselves and live out those unlived qualities that were buried in the shadow. But beware, because with reinvention from the outside in, new roles may be more of the same in disguise, holding a persona in place and requiring the same sacrifices. When this is the case, these new roles rob us of the potential shift in identity. So if most people let go of career identities and enjoy the years after retirement, why are we so afraid of retiring? Our unconscious identification with youth and with success in doing are the guardians at the threshold that keep us from crossing over. Shadow work can reorient us to our inner depths and help us release these past identities. Let me give you an example. My client George at 73 continued to manage daily operations of his insurance firm. Although he was bone tired and missing time with his grandkids, he didn't want to slow down. When asked why, he told me that both his grandfather and his father became useless in retirement. Quote, "Grandpa watched TV all day. When Dad quit his job, he did nothing but play bridge and eat. They both seemed sad and useless, so I dread retiring," unquote. Eventually, George came to see that he had embodied an unconscious image of his grandfather sitting in a rocker watching TV that he carried throughout his life. When men are no longer providers, who are we, he asked. George came to understand that a shadow character was defending him against feeling useless by continuing to push him at work. But by unknowingly relying on this strategy, he was failing to let go, find a new rhythm, explore the dreams he had left behind, and shift from role to soul. As we did shadow work with the useless retiree, he began to make time to help his grandchildren learn to read, which opened a new avenue of usefulness. And on a whim, he enrolled in a watercolor class and became captivated. The decision to work part-time followed. And when the vice president replaced him, he retired and the useless retiree shadow receded. "I feel a sense of freedom," he said, "that I didn't know was possible. When I'm painting, it's as if I'm doing something that I've always wanted to do." So here's a question for you. Do you identify with the doer in a midlife heroic mode? Or do you act as something great on behalf of something greater as an elder? Who is the unconscious shadow character who is driving you to achieve? Are you controlled by it? Take a moment now and contemplate these questions that you can see on the screen. How did this shadow character protect you in the past? And how is it sabotaging you now? And this will take more than these couple of minutes that we have together, but if this interests you, you can trace back this shadow character in your history, understand its origins and how it was protecting you, and then see more clearly how it's sabotaging you now in the transition after midlife. As I said earlier, when we cross a passage to become an adult, or change careers or suffer an illness, we change archetypes. And for most people, this is not a conscious process. But the call to shift from role to soul may become more conscious when our responsibilities fall away, or we face a serious loss or illness or another big lifestyle change. At a deeper level, our ego's lifelong identity may be shattered. If it's the doer, for example, our ability to internally retire the doer, or the dominator, the competitor, the provider, the wife, the husband, whatever you want to call it, is our ability to internally retire that identity is enhanced when we meditate and experience pure awareness. As we did together this morning, I found that very beautiful. So a quiet mind helps us retire fixed ideas, past identities, and a need to control, all traits that no longer serve us. When we discover through meditation how the mind works, and we learn how to observe our thoughts rather than buying into them, we begin to get free of the mind's chatter, and we begin to empty it out, as Dana's quotation from the Tao spoke about. In this way, we cultivate aging as spiritual practice, and we cross the threshold from role to soul, finding an identity beyond doing and beyond image. So these contemplative practices that I'll give you right now, and many others in the book, continually turn your attention from role to soul. So you begin with centering yourself with whatever your practice is. You might focus on your breath or mantra or prayer. And as you quiet down, you identify when a shadow character emerges, when you are hearing the voice or seeing the image of a shadow character. And you learn how to observe it and separate from it. And you can do that by addressing it out loud. So I see you now, doer, trying to get me to rev up again. And as you objectify it and address it, you're separating yourself from it. And you recognize this is not you. This is not who you really are. I feel you, perfectionist. I feel your intention to get me to control things and not let go. And as you practice this, first identifying the shadow character and then addressing it and separating from it, you begin to get the internal experience that this is not who you really are. And so then you practice saying to yourself, I am not the doer, I am a soul, or I am pure awareness, or I am spirit, or I am divine. You can choose your language. Ram Dass called it loving awareness. If you prefer this, you can say, I am not the doer. I am that which lives and breathes through everything. And you can practice internalizing the deeper identity, thinking it, feeling it, and embodying it as you release your role. So let's stop for a moment here and ask yourself, what is the name you give to your deeper identity? And how can you embody it? How can you begin to express it in your life now? So with the inner work of age, we can make this shift, dropping our personas and habitual fears and automatic reactions to become fully real and transparent, perhaps for the first time. Age is our curriculum. And this is the book. It explores many themes about aging and offers practices in every chapter, both shadow work and contemplative practices. Okay.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I'm going to buy that book.
Thank you.